Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. The University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources, also known as UCANR, is delighted to welcome you to the second installment of our webinar series on sustainable food systems emerging issues. Before beginning, I want to recognize my co-organizer, Mary Lou Arpaia, and the members of the Sustainable Food Systems Strategic Initiative panel and UCANR staff in planning and bringing this webinar to you. I am Danielle Lee, the Director of Communications and Research Engagement at the Nutrition Policy Institute at UCANR, and I'm also a member of the UCANR Sustainable Food Systems Strategic Initiative panel. The Sustainable Food Systems Strategic Initiative panel is one of 5 strategic initiative panels within the UC Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Next slide. UCANR has 5 strategic initiatives whose division is to unify, communicate, and advocate for the work that we do, including identifying gaps and priorities for future research and extension programming, and communicating important research and extension findings to our California public. The Sustainable Food Systems Strategic Initiative supports California by bringing good science and outreach to bear on key issues related to sustainable production, safe processing, enhanced access, and waste reduction. The Sustainable Food System Strategic Initiative helps build our state economy, protect our natural resources, build capacity of our people and communities, and helps ensure we have safe food. Next slide. So this is the second part of a 2-part webinar series. The first webinar, part 1, highlighted 3 perspectives on addressing food waste from field to fork. The webinar recording will be available online soon for those of you that missed it. And today we'll be focusing on food access and equity, and we'll take a deep look into the topic of farms to corrections and nutrition education and gardening initiatives. This session will be moderated by myself. And if you have any technical needs, please send a direct message to Bridget Alvarez using the chat feature. Next slide. So as I mentioned, today's session focuses on food access and equity, and we'll take a deep look into the topic of farms to corrections and nutrition education and gardening initiatives. We will have 2 talks. The first will be exploring innovative initiatives by the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation in collaboration with the Nutrition Policy Institute and Impact Justice, including a Harvest of the Month program to increase access to fresh, locally grown fresh fruits and vegetables, and trauma-informed nutrition workshops. The second talk will discuss the impact of the University of California's Master Gardeners projects on rehabilitation and workforce development. Next slide. So joining us for these 2 talks are experts from across our field. Our first talk will feature Carolyn Chelius. She's a project policy analyst at the Nutrition Policy Institute at the University of California. Carolyn evaluates policies and programs aimed at increasing access to healthy food and reducing diet-related health disparities. She will be joined by Heile Gantan. Heile is a senior program associate with the Food in Prison Project. Her background, and she's with Impact Justice. Her background in nutrition, public policy, and lived experience with the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation motivates her work to support the health and well-being of incarcerated people by improving the food experience. Carolyn and Heile will be joined by Lance Eshelman. Lance is the Departmental Food Administrator for the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. He began his career when he became a correctional supervising cook at Chocowalla Valley State Prison in 2009. And since then, Lance has promoted through the ranks in food service and now provides guidance to the entire California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation Food Services Department. As a leader in the correctional food service industries, it is one of his goals to shape the food services operations to be looked upon as a valued component of the rehabilitative nature. And finally, our final talk features Missy Gable, the director of the statewide UC Master Gardener program. In this capacity, she works closely with the network of over 6,000 volunteers, staff, and academics who support local projects with transformational impact. Unfortunately, Missy had a last-minute conflict arise for today's webinar, So instead of Missy joining us live, we will be playing a recording of her talk. During this webinar, please submit all questions to the Q&A feature instead of the chat. And I'm going to pass it over now to our first set of speakers to talk to us about produce during and after prison, increasing justice impacted individuals' access to California grown produce and nutrition education. Next slide, Bridget.
Thank you so much, Danielle. My name is Carolyn Chelius, as Danielle introduced, and I'm from the University of California Nutrition Policy Institute, and I'll be speaking with Heile Gantan and Lance Eshelman today about produce during and after prison. Next slide, please. So as I said, I'm Carolyn, and I'm from the University of California Nutrition Policy Institute. We also have two other members of our team who are not speaking, but who also played an integral role in the work you'll see here today. And then Heile, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about impact justice?
Thanks, Carolyn. Hi, everyone. My name is Heile Gantan. As was mentioned earlier, I'm a senior program associate with the Food in Prison Project at Impact Justice. And what we do as a project team is we conduct research on the topic of food in prison, but we also develop programs across the country in partnership with DOCs, as you'll learn later in this presentation, to again support the nutrition and the food experience for people in the carceral system.
Thank you, Heile. And I'll now pass it over to Lance to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about what you do and where you're based.
Yeah, thank you, Carolyn. My name is Lance Eshelman. I am the Departmental Food Administrator. I work in Sacramento, and I do provide guidance to the various institutions within the correctional facilities and the Division of Adult Institutions up and down the state. And like it was mentioned by Daniela earlier, I have been with the department for about 14 years now, and including my role as a food service staff member. I also was a community resources manager, as my good buddy Gunnar mentioned in the chat. So thank you for that shout out. But within that work, the 5 years as a community resources manager, it really ties into the work that we're doing in providing food to the folks in our care. And so I'm happy to be here, happy to be presenting to all of you. Thank you, Carolyn.
Great. And then I'd also, again, like to acknowledge the other folks who are listed on this slide who are not speaking with us, but who have been a big part of this project, including Spork Food Hub, who we'll talk about a little bit later. And then another thing I want to mention is that nonprofit Change Lab Solutions was also a big part of this project in the first round of work. And there's kind of been a second round that's been less policy oriented, and they haven't been on the direct team, but I would also just like to acknowledge their contributions as well. Next slide, please. So I'd like to mention that this project was funded through a U.S. Department of Agriculture specialty crop block grant. And all of our presenters have no conflicts of interest to disclose. Next slide. So now I'm going to turn it over to Heile, who's going to talk about our motivation for this project.
Thanks, Carolyn. So Impact Justice and NPI, we were both really motivated by our shared interest in promoting the health of marginalized communities. And our goal was to promote the health of residents within the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation by increasing access to California-grown fruits and vegetables. So currently, what we've learned is that CDCR is the largest state purchaser of food, spending over $150 million, and they're also charged for feeding almost 100,000 residents per year. We know that food choice is limited, or it's even non-existent for some folks who don't receive outside support. And sometimes access to fresh fruits and vegetables outside of what they're given is poor. But there have been efforts to improve the statewide menu. So I'll actually let Lance kind of speak on this and some of the efforts that have been done.
Yeah, thank you, Heile. Now, when I talk about the efforts that are being made, it's important to know where we've come from, right? And so when I started in 2009, we were given the population about 3,600 calories, a lot of different starchy items. We did 4 to 6 slices of bread per day, beans twice a day. And so we really worked with our CCHCS folks, which is our healthcare unit, and took a look at our average sized incarcerated individual. and took the menu that we were serving at the time and really dialed it in to give them what they actually needed, which really isn't 3,600 calories. That's an awful lot of calories per day for an individual. And so we reduced it to 2,400 calories, and then also worked with our budget management branch to increase the cost that that the Department of Finance was providing for our population, because providing more fruits and vegetables, we all know, we've done the research that eating healthy does sometimes cost more. So while we did reduce our calories from 3,600 to 2,400 calories per day, offering those additional fruits and vegetables did incur an additional cost. Now, I'm happy to say that since 2016, we have been providing additional fruits and vegetables. Now, with those fruits and vegetables, this is where the efforts are beginning to take, I guess, trend a little bit better or track a little bit better, because now instead of offering the standard apple a day and banana twice a day, we're actually being a little bit more adventurous with what we're providing. So we're looking at different food products that we can provide to the population, various fruits and vegetables that aren't your average apple or banana. And so we will talk more about what we're doing as we progress through this presentation, but I am excited that we are able to take this journey together. Thank you, Heile.
Thanks for sharing that, Lance. And also, despite California's reputation as being ranked the #1 agricultural state, it's unfortunately not common that local produce reaches the prisons, which are often in close proximity to some local farms. Next slide, please. So the state of produce after prison for individuals, it's not very often that they return back to their communities in better health than when they left, simply because of the diet during incarceration, as well as the other factors that people experience throughout their time. Individuals often have trouble identifying, purchasing, and even preparing healthy food after incarceration. And this can really be because of traumatic experiences that they've experienced either before incarceration, during incarceration, even after, and it can really exacerbate the challenges that people face, including prolonged periods of food insecurity. Often what we hear is that there are normalized responses to the food environment inside. So we hear about people experiencing feelings of constant hunger, and what is available to incarcerated residents is unfortunately shelf-stable convenience foods. And that's also only if they have the funds to acquire those foods. So it's likely for individuals who get used to preparing these convenience foods that they bring these practices with them when re-entering back into society, because it's easy, it's budget friendly, it doesn't require too much culinary skills when being reintroduced into a regular kitchen. So something that you'll see on this slide here, the photo that's kind of in the middle of this slide, this is a real screenshot that I've had some dialogue with a friend who I've met while incarcerated. And I just happened to see it on the screen. You know, she mentioned that this was a food that she was used to eating because she was institutionalized for so long. And really in this bowl, you see a packet of top ramen noodles, some chips to add flavoring, and then also some pork rinds to add protein. So again, speaking to the skills and maybe also the lack of information that some folks have when re-entering into society. Next slide, please. Thank you. So why do we want to increase fresh produce within CDCR? So it's a win-win-win situation here. So at an individual level, it improves the nutrition and overall health of individuals who are in the system. And it's really not just limited to the physical health, but it helps with mental and emotional health as well. After speaking with residents who are formerly and currently incarcerated, they appreciate the efforts that is made to improve the variety of food, and specifically fresh food, that's available to them. Next, specifically when increasing California-grown products, it helps provide economic benefits to local growers and businesses. So smaller farmers and farmer-led aggregators that are otherwise not able to enter a market channel that was not available to them previously. And lastly, it does come around full circle, because then by improving the health of individuals, it improves the health, safety, and the resiliency of the communities that individuals return home to. We do believe that when people are nourished and whose basic needs are met, they're able to return to society and contribute positively. And also then this would help reduce recidivism or reoffending into the system. And so then now I will go ahead and pass it back to Carolyn, who will talk more about our Farm to Corrections research and the programs that we've created under this project.
Next slide, please. And next slide. Great. So our programming and research our work can be divided into two main buckets, what we're calling our research and what we're calling our programming. So in our research bucket, we conducted state and national level policy scans to get an idea of what policies exist in California and even nationally that could support procurement of local produce in institutions like prisons. And we also conducted interviews with state and national stakeholders. So these are people like formerly incarcerated individuals, people who work in corrections or policymakers, growers, to get a better sense of what could facilitate or prevent the procurement of local produce in CDCR facilities. And then the kind of next arm of our work was our programming. So we used what we learned from our research to develop two types of programs, the first of which is a Harvest of the Month project with CDCR, which we're going to talk about at length. And that is a project to actually increase access to fresh produce within CDCR facilities. And then also we implemented nutrition education workshops for system impacted individuals. So these are for folks returning home from incarceration, such that these folks have the resources and education they need to be able to nourish themselves and understand the benefits of a healthy diet. Next slide. So to start with, I'll talk a little bit about our research and highlight findings from our California state policy scan. So we learned about two, what we call produce preference policies or purchasing preference policies that facilitate the purchasing of California or locally grown produce by state-run institutions. And when I say institutions, I'm referring to anything like a hospital, a prison, a school, something that's operated by the state of California. And the first policy is AB 822, which was passed in 2017. And this provides a 5% price preference for California grown produce purchased by state-run institutions. So an example of that might be, say, a facility at CDCR is hoping to purchase oranges for its residents. And they have oranges that are $1 a pound from Florida. They'd be able to purchase California grown oranges if they're $1.05 a pound. And so that's kind of the idea behind a purchase preference policy, and they exist in California, but also nationally. And then in 2022, so actually during the span of our project, the legislature passed 778, which requires state-run institutions to purchase at least 60% of their agricultural food products from California. So this law has a little bit more kind of teeth to it. It's more strict, and both policies can sort of offer an opportunity. We can leverage these policies to encourage more state purchasing of California grown produce. However, neither policy actually has enforcement mechanisms, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But basically, the idea is, despite these being on the books, it's not really clear how well they're utilized. There's no kind of tracking or commitment mechanism for them to be followed. So that's another kind of important piece. Next slide. And I'll turn it over to Heile, who will talk a little bit about our interviews with stakeholders.
Thanks, Carolyn. So we spoke to a group of formerly incarcerated individuals, and we've learned that there is a strong demand for increased access to fresh food items. We've heard that, they feel like their health would be more supported. It would reduce those feelings of hunger that I mentioned earlier, and also allow them to feel a sense of normalcy. Some residents who we've spoken with not too long ago also have shared that they've gone for a number of years, even decades, without having a persimmon. And that was a very real example where it's like, wow, that's something that a lot of us really take for granted. And it can also be very difficult to find the fresh fruits and vegetables that I mentioned outside of the dining hall, or what they call the chow hall. But if they can, sometimes it can be through unconventional means. And unfortunately, it is difficult to find a good variety inside. As Lance mentioned, there is a rotation of apples and bananas, and sometimes an orange, just depending on the day or the season. But, just day in and day out, for context, looking at it, if you're experiencing incarceration for years on end, this can become very repetitive. Next slide, please. After speaking with a number of staff from the corrections department, CDCR is interested in supplying more fruits and vegetables, but unfortunately, they do experience some challenges in trying to do so. Another thing that we've learned is that CDCR, because they're responsible for feeding, thousands, upwards of 4,000 at a single facility of folks at a time, that they do prefer vendors that can handle the volume that's required and also can handle some substitutions. At this time, Lance, can you kind of talk about some of those challenges that we've heard about?
Sure, Heile. Yeah, and you're correct. CDCR does want to supply more fresh fruits and vegetables to our incarcerated individuals. There's been some movement within the there has been some movement within the Department of Corrections where we're no longer warehousing these individuals like we've done in the past and experiencing triple bunks in some of our housing units. Now we're looking at more of a normalized situation. And so when our correctional staff and our food service staff are serving a tray, we want to do it with intention. And when I say a tray, I mean a plate of food. We want to do it with the intention that, hey, would we like receiving an apple a day? And while it is important, there is that age-old adage about an apple a day. Like Heile had mentioned, if you're incarcerated for several years, those apples are not going to be consumed every day. And so it's important to offer that variety. But here we see that budget constraints is one of the first bullet on here. And that's not by accident. An apple, we can pay 12 cents per serving, whereas that persimmons that Heile had mentioned earlier, you're looking at about a 30-cent cost per serving. And so those budget constraints are really difficult to get around. Like it was mentioned earlier, Assembly Bill 778 really does give us the ability to purchase those more expensive items while trying to maintain our budget. The safety concerns is definitely one of those top issues. We're working with individuals that have made mistakes in their lives, and some continue to make those mistakes while locked up inside of our care. And so we're looking at items like a jalapeno that could be used for, say, I don't know the correct term that I want to use here, but for a nefarious reason or a nefarious way, they could use that jalapeno to act as a pepper spray or something that would intentionally blind somebody temporarily. So we definitely have to look at that. And I'm sure you all are familiar with what we refer to as pruno, which is inmate manufactured wine. And so if we're providing unsupervised amounts of grapes and allowing those grapes to ferment, the folks in our care can create pruno or inmate manufactured wine. So we definitely have to take those things into consideration. And menu requirements, right? We try to standardize the menu. And so while we're looking at institutions far down south next to the Mexico border, all the way up to Oregon border, there's different regions that supply or provide different fruits or vegetables. And so we do try to keep it more standardized. And of course, our equipment and infrastructure, a lot of our institutions, the majority of our institutions are 30 plus years old. And so the equipment is either outdated and is being replaced or consistently maintained. And so the infrastructure and the equipment is not consistent throughout the board. And so we do operate a simplified food service operation And that is why, another reason why the apple and banana a day definitely helped with that consistency. The food managers know to prepare these items, right? Because they're a handheld item, very easy to distribute. And so when we do talk about getting food items that are a little bit different, like a butternut squash, and it takes a little bit of a different production, it does create some challenges, but it's something that we can work through. But thank you, Heile.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that additional context, Lance. Next slide, please. And lastly, from our interviews with growers and distributors, we've learned that the small local farmers who we would like to engage with may not be equipped to complete the administrative paperwork that's required to become a state vendor. This can range from just having limited capacity because they have reduced staff, or even the technical skills that might be needed to complete that administrative work. And also, the competitive bidding process very rarely allows for small businesses to win bids against the larger vendors. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So with all of that being said, we've done the research. And so what are we going to do with all of this information? So to support people who are currently incarcerated, our project team developed a Harvest of the Month program with CDCR. So for those who may not know, Harvest of the Month is a model that was found successful in the K through 12 districts to increase the amount of fruits and vegetables consumed by students, and also help tie in stronger relationships with small local farms. So what we do with this program in partnership with CDCR is we introduce one new local item one time a month to the incarcerated population. And we understand, despite the incarcerated population's demand for an increased amount of fruits and vegetables, this is one very small change, but it can also grow to make a big difference. And that is our hope. And we've even heard from residents who are currently participating in the program that they have already sensed the difference in terms of what they're receiving from the larger vendors versus the Harvest of the Month item, just simply due to quality as well. So through this program, we're able to connect CDCR with those small local growers that I mentioned previously. We help CDCR leverage those procurement policies that Carolyn mentioned earlier, along with being able to record and track the source of origin for these products, and also to help increase the amount of local produce and the variety of the produce that's served to residents. Additionally, we also provide a little bit of education to them through our monthly flyers that you see up on the screen, and it includes that source of origin information, the nutritional benefits of the item, along with some serving suggestions that residents can take back with them. And lastly, what we were able to do and are able to do is to help evaluate the program and its success. So at this time now, Lance will go ahead and talk about how it all came to be and the direction that we're headed.
Yeah, thank you, Heile. And so what we're looking at is Assembly Bill 778, right? Which does require us to purchase 60% of our agricultural or our produce from a California grown source. And again, when we're talking about apples and bananas, we know that apples aren't available year round. We know bananas aren't available in California. And so it really is a challenge to think outside the box. And so when Harvest of the Month was introduced to me as well as the secretary, it was definitely a no-brainer, right? So we're getting that support from the secretary. We're getting that support from the governor with the Assembly bill. And so we started in July of last year, introducing one produce item to 3 institutions once a month. And now today we're sitting at 9 institutions with another 3 coming on board next month. So very exciting and looking forward to it. Thank you, Heile.
Yeah, no problem. Next slide, please, Bridget. Thanks. And then the next, Lance, did you want to speak on that as well?
Yeah, I guess I can just go into a little further depth when it comes to the support. What the institutions, what the wardens want to do at the end of the day is give the residents, give the folks in our care everything that they have coming, and do it in a way that is supported by policy. And so when the policy before says that we do have to purchase that lowest price item, it really does restrict us to buying the apple or banana. And so Assembly Bill 778, again, does give the institutions that support that's much needed. This was definitely a big topic of conversation of, is it supported? Are we as a institution, as CDCR, able to purchase an item that does cost more? And the answer is yes. If we're looking at Roma tomatoes being provided to our department, our CDCR institutions in Central California, and we're looking at product that's coming from Mexico, while we have fields upon fields in Central California growing that same product, we want to purchase that product. We want to be able to support our local farmers, and Harvest of the Month and Assembly Bill 778 does give us that ability. Thank you, Heile.
Thanks, Lance. Next slide, please. All right, and as Lance mentioned, we are on track to scale out to all 33 facilities. Here in blue, you'll see the ones that we are currently operating at. The ones that are highlighted in yellow are the ones that will be onboarding in April. But because we're working with One Food Hub now, we've also realized that there is still some need to partner with additional food hubs. All the way at the top of the state, you'll see Pelican Bay State Prison, closer to the Oregon border. And then we also have Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility all the way down in San Diego, closer to the Mexico border. And so, we still have some need there in order to kind of fill that supply so that residents can still all be receiving the same Harvest of the Month program with wherever that they're at. And then now I'll go ahead and pass it to Carolyn, who'll talk about how we're increasing access to fresh fruits and vegetables for people returning home from incarceration.
I'll actually give Heile one more time we forgot we have a couple of statistics that are helpful to share.
Sorry about that. This might be interesting to some folks. So just at a quick glance, CDCR has spent almost $33,000 on this project, also bringing in 27,000 pounds of produce to CDCR residents and reaching a little more than 8,000. I think we're closer to 9,000 because it doesn't really account for people who have transferred, maybe who have paroled already. But again, this is just the range from July of last year to January of this year. And then now, if we can switch slides, and Carolyn will now talk about those education workshops. Thank you.
Thanks, Heile. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing for folks who have come home and returned to communities after being inside a prison. And these are nutrition education workshops that we've held across the state. So we've conducted these from October 2022 to February 2023 across the state of California in 8 cities, as well as 2 virtual workshops. And you can see from the map on the slide that we held them as far south as San Diego and as far north as Humboldt County and Eureka. And we held 12 total workshops. They were attended by around 135 system impacted individuals. So these are both people who personally experienced incarceration, as well as their family, their loved ones. And they were all led by facilitators with lived experience. So people who themselves had also experienced incarceration. And we found that this was really important for participants to feel like they trusted the facilitators, like their experience was reflected in what the facilitators were saying. And it worked really well for facilitators to kind of imbue some of their own personal experiences in the actual curriculum and share what it was like to come home from incarceration and figure out how to cook for themselves, eat for themselves, all that sort of thing. And so we also evaluated the workshops with post-workshop surveys, as well as a couple of qualitative interviews, and we'll be sharing some information from those. Next slide. So the workshop curriculum was really about returning home from incarceration and learning how to both eat and nourish oneself, and specifically thinking about food and trauma as well. So we really wanted to make a point to kind of make this curriculum unique and tailored to the individuals who are receiving it. So we started off by using a curriculum using kind of CalFresh or SNAP-Ed resources, but then tailored it to make sure that it had information that was relevant to the particular population. A big part of that being addressing food and trauma. So as Heile mentioned early on, a lot of people who experience incarceration have experienced trauma before even being incarcerated, and then certainly while incarcerated. It's very common to have traumatic experiences. Just being incarcerated is traumatic. So people are coming home to often having not been able to cook for themselves in 20 plus years, being served the same thing. And people kind of develop some ingrained habits and resort to the same kind of comfort foods, like the slide that Heile showed earlier with the pork rinds and the ramen. And so it's really important to talk about those things. And it was really helpful, again, for the facilitators who had lived through those same struggles, often shared similar trauma, to also talk through that. So this curriculum also talked about other kind of structural barriers to eating a healthy diet. As you all may know, there's a lot of overlap between populations that experience incarceration and historically marginalized populations in our country. And so it was also important to us that we talk about some of those more systemic issues like food deserts, or what's more commonly called now food apartheid, or also things like structural racism and kind of the way communities are developed and where grocery stores are and aren't, and transportation issues, things like that. Because we wanted to make it clear that the onus of eating a healthy diet isn't just on the consumer. It isn't just about making personal choices. There are also some really big barriers that are outside of that person's control. And while that can be hard to kind of address, and it's not like we were kind of coming up with a solution to that, I think it was really helpful for participants to engage with that information because it gave them words to kind of describe things that they had experienced in their own lives. Like, for example, I remember a participant standing up and saying, wow, I hadn't really thought about until now the fact that my neighborhood, which was predominantly a neighborhood of color, had a really kind of rundown grocery store, and the produce was really of poor quality as compared to the higher end grocery store in the more affluent neighborhood across town. So we talked about those things. We also talked about the nitty-gritty components of a healthy diet. So the benefits of all food groups, including fruits and vegetables. We shared practical strategies for selecting and preparing fresh produce. So we shared recipes, we shared information about how to tell if produce is ripe or not, what produce pairs best with, how to cut it, things like that. And we actually shared a healthy recipe tasting. You'll see in the picture on the slide, someone tasting a grape and jicama salsa on a tostada. It was very well received. And we also shared some food assistance resources because, again, there's a lot of overlap between people coming home from incarceration and food insecurity, and people often aren't coming home with a lot of resources. So it was important that we include information about how to access food for low prices or even for free. So we shared information that was regionally tailored to where the workshop was located on where to access food pantries, discount grocery stores, even things like food co-ops or food policy councils, community gardens, also trying to get at some of these structural issues to talk about kind of our food system more generally. Next slide. So we got some really great feedback from our workshops, from our surveys with participants. Almost all participants reported they would recommend the workshop to a friend or family member. Most learned about the health benefits of fruits and vegetables, shared they developed strategies for how to prepare, store, access them. And I think around 80% reported an intention to consume more fruits and vegetables, which was exciting. One of my favorite quotes from our qualitative interviews that we did with a subset of workshop participants was, one workshop participant saying, since the workshop, I've not only begun to eat vegetables with dinner, I also eat them with breakfast, which we were really delighted to hear. And then we also heard really good things from workshop facilitators as well. We have a quote here where a facilitator is sharing that they really like connecting with people face to face, doing that outreach, and they enjoyed sharing their personal experiences and developing community. Host organizations, or the organizations that actually lent us their space and helped coordinate and facilitate the logistics of the workshop, also reported having a good experience, said they would do it again, and would recommend it to another. Next slide. So Heile and Lance talked a little bit about where Harvest of the Month is going. So I wanted to talk a little bit about where these nutrition education workshops are going. So after the success of our first round of workshops, we plan to expand them and hold more. However, what we're hoping to do is implement what we're calling a train the trainer nutrition education workshop models, where our small team isn't doing all of the organizing and recruitment and facilitation and all of that, but will actually be recruiting community-based organizations or reentry organizations. And reentry organizations are organizations that are specifically focused on helping people who have been incarcerated come home and reintegrate into their community. And we're hoping to work with these organizations to train facilitators, so train folks that are interested in delivering these workshops such that they can deliver them in their own communities. And that'll help spread the reach without us having to do it. Of course, we'll be supporting, we'll be helping with the training, we'll be there for technical support, but the idea is to kind of expand them beyond our reach. And the goal is to conduct, I think, 25 workshops over the next few years. Next slide. And I just wanted to share a couple of resources. These are publications that we've put out focusing on the work that we've just shared. And Danielle is going to put them in the chat in case you want to actually link them, open them up in your browser and save them for later, bookmark them. We've put out a lot. The first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like it's hard to count right now, but are all from our particular team. And the last one is just an impact justice report that discusses food in prison nationally, if this is a topic that you're interested in. But the first several talk about some of them talk about our nutrition education workshops. One of them is a fact sheet looking at that purchase preference policy, AB 822. One of them is just talking about, in general, about strategies to introduce more locally grown produce in California state prisons. And then another one talks about kind of promising practices across the US in corrections departments that are doing a really great job of this sort of work. Next slide. So I just also want to finish with some acknowledgements. So a big thank you to our project partners and our advisory council, our stakeholders, and all those who have participated in interviews or helped host or facilitate the nutrition education workshops. Next slide. So that is the end of our presentation. Our contact information is on the slide if you'd like to reach out with any questions. And I think we're going to be taking questions now as a change of schedule. So.
Thank you so much, Carolyn, Lance, and Heile. Such an inspiring project that you have going on. And Bridget, you can go ahead and stop sharing this screen. So inspiring. It's so great to see what started in schools and colleges with the Harvest of the Month being expanded to the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitations. And CDRC is the single largest public purchaser of food in the state of California. So when we're thinking of supply chain and the impact, this is massive. And also really exciting to hear about the nutrition education efforts that are happening post-incarceration. All of this is so important. Thank you so, so much. And I want to thank all of you too who submitted questions to our question and answer chat feature. So if you do have questions, please submit them in the Q&A, and I'm going to go ahead and go through all of these one by one. Our first question, and this was brought up by several folks in the chat as well, is with regards to the cost. So Lance, you mentioned the increased costs when adding fresh fruits and vegetables. Is there not a long-term health cost savings when you take into account the cost of healthcare for an aging prison population who are suffering from negative health outcomes, heart disease, diabetes, etc., and linked to a poor diet. And in addition to this, there were some additional comments around mental health outcomes as well. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to you.
Yeah, now, first and foremost, I am not a registered dietitian. I help with the policies and how to implement them at the institutions. However, I work very closely with the chief of dietary services, who does provide all of that information. And she will say day in and day out, Lance, we have to continue providing these fresh fruits and vegetables. We have to keep doing it. And it's true. You know, all of this does affect their health, those ones in our care. It affects their health, their mental aspect, and their outlook at where they're at. And so, yes, it's very important, and we're going to continue to do that. You know, like I had mentioned earlier, back in 2016 is when we did change the calorie content that we were providing from 3,600 to 2,400. That was specifically to address the health issues we were experiencing with our the folks in our care. And so we have seen a decline with some of those, the diabetes and things like that. And again, my folks at CCHCS, which is our healthcare services, they do have that information. But yes, we're going to continue to keep doing this. Thank you. Good question.
Yeah,
I'll share too. Oh, sorry. I'll share too that in our interviews with corrections folks, we talked to several people in CCHCS and folks that are doctors in the medical side. And so many of them share that viewpoint of this would really help long-term savings. We've really got to get this on board. So there are certainly folks that share that viewpoint. And it's hard to have the data, obviously, because it's, as many of you know who are in nutrition, it's a long-term game, and it's hard to show that data when there's also a very short-term gain in terms of finances. So, but I did want to share that we've also talked with those folks, Lance, and they feel the same way.
Great. Thank you so much for that great question, Gunnar. And similar topic, this is from Beth, and it seems more of a comment, but feel free if you want to respond. Assuming familiarity with SQ, which is San Quentin's People in Blue Contributory Report, implementation of the California model, specifically the Right to Heal document, Food as Medicine component. Any response as to planned conversations with People in Blue about their strategy for healthier populations and communities? And the strategy is specifically, the goal of Right to Heal design theory is to shape food environments through marginalized communities, urban, rural, and incarcerated, in order to heal people who are being harmed by poor access to food and the poor quality of food to which they have access. And Beth commented that this is proof that it is not just healthy, but also affordable, desirable, and satiating. So any one of you, and maybe Lance, maybe you can start us off.
Yeah, I could start us off with saying this. The folks in blue have great ideas. They really know what's needed to change where we're at. And again, we're a huge department, right? And so we're a huge ship. It takes a long time to turn that ship. But with the California model, which I spoke a little bit about earlier, with normalizing the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, we're slowly seeing that ship turn. We're listening to the folks in our care. We're listening to the men in blue, as they're often referred to. And so, yes, they have ideas. We have different organizations like Impact Justice, like Insight Gardening, so many others that are coming into our institutions, spending time with these individuals, taking their thoughts, taking their ideas, taking them to the legislation. And it's really good. It's really great work that has to be done. So there's much more to say about that, but I'll turn it over to my other partners here in this call.
And Heile and Carolyn, any other thoughts on that one before we move on?
I think Lance summed it up very well. I know that the People in Blue, this is a kind of like a newer-ish effort, especially with like all of the progress that CDCR is striving towards. But me as an advocate, this might be a more personal note, I'm very much in favor of having the resident population's voices be a contributing factor to future changes within the department.
Great, thank you. And you kind of touched on this in your most recent response, Lance. And we'll also be talking about this in our next talk from Missy Gable from the Master Gardeners Program, but from an anonymous attendee. What about therapeutic access to land? Inmates being able to manage orchards and farms from which they feed themselves, food production prioritized for inmate consumption, not export capitalization to general civilian population. So this could be for any of you.
Yeah, and I understand Missy's going to be talking about this a little bit more in her presentation, and it's important. I think to date, last data that I received is that throughout our 30 plus institutions, 12 of those institutions do have 19 gardens. And those gardens are tended by the folks in our care, overseen by the folks like Insight Gardening. Great work being done there. And the therapeutic aspect of it, to get outside, to see the greenery, to see the different plants, the herbs, is so much of a change than what they're used to seeing with the correctional setting, the barbed wire, the concrete walls. And so I think there's definitely some good work being done out there. And looking at how we can then take these fruits, vegetables, and herbs and give them back to the kitchens that are serving the population, really kind of full circle. Like, the folks that are preparing this are providing it to their brothers or sisters. And I think it's something that could be a holistic, I guess, effort. But you know, that's all I have to say there. Thank you for the question.
And Heile and Carolyn, any other thoughts on that one before we move on? Okay. So this one is from Mary Purdy. Mary, thank you for submitting this one. What kind of power influence can dietitians who work in the system have on changing menus or providing more access to fresh produce and fewer ultra-processed foods? There are many non-dangerous vegetables that can be put into soups and stews and cooked so that there is not an issue of spoilage.
Yeah, great question. So being that we're in California and we're running the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitations, we're beholden to a lot of different policies, a lot of different laws. So there's definitely some agencies that we have to purchase from, say, for instance, Prison Industry Authority, as well as the Department of General Services does host our mandatory contracts. So there are food items that we have to purchase on. So the dietitians definitely have the ability to work with my shop. We have the ability to approach these different agencies and request certain things, but there is very little change that can be done at a local level. However, I want to go back to talking about the Chief of Dietary Services. Her shop and my shop are working in tandem to make sure that we are providing that healthy nutritional menu to everybody in our care. And so we do meet the goals that are required by the dietary allowances and things like that.
And I'm going to skip ahead to a couple more questions around this theme of nutrition. There was also a question regarding, given that this is from Judy, given the cost and increase in type 2 diabetes, are you emphasizing vegetables over fruits? And if so, are inmates accepting the vegetables?
That's a great question. And thank you for recognizing that sometimes we don't want to eat that, right? We don't want to eat that vegetable. We do want that soup with the chips inside of it that Heile had shown earlier. However, that soup with the chips in it may do a little bit better if we had some bell pepper chopped up in there, some garlic chopped up in there, and some other fresh vegetables chopped up in that soup. Now, when it comes to replacing, when it comes to serving the fruit, we're really just looking at what fruit is already on the menu and then replacing it with the fruit that's a locally grown fruit. So we're not adding additional fruits or vegetables. We're staying within that 2 servings per day of fruits and 2 to 3 servings per day for the vegetables. And so we're definitely trying to stay within that margin.
Great. And this was another question regarding nutrition. So sounds like you've been talking a lot about the menus and what's being offered to the residents. And I'm curious, there was a question from Trevor Clark. Any plans to push for healthier commissary items too? The processed junk food people can buy, like the ramen with chips, is not great. So maybe you can also describe what a commissary is too for folks who are unfamiliar.
Yeah, so a commissary works like a little 7-Eleven within the institution. So if an individual wants to go purchase some of those non-perishable shelf-stable foods that Heile was mentioning earlier, they have the ability to do that 1 to 2 times a month. There are efforts being made to allow for more healthier products on those shelves and have the ability to purchase those healthier items. And it really goes back to the question earlier. Do the folks in our care actually want that? And what we've seen is that some institutions, like the women's institution, really wants those salads in the commissary, whereas the men aren't purchasing those items. And so they do spoil and they end up having to be tossed out or thrown away. And so it really goes back to, do they want it? And what I really like here is that there's an opportunity to provide more education. Why are we offering this healthier item? You know, some of these folks have been consuming top ramen day in and day out for 30 years. And so it's time to start that education piece. And we're really working on that with our media folks and really highlighting why we're doing this. We want to keep them healthy. And so it is a giant push, but we are working on it. And yes, there are those healthier items in the commissary.
I'll share a couple more information about that too. Is that something, working on commissary or canteen is something that our, what we call farm to corrections team, has been really interested in as well. Another piece, I can't remember if you mentioned this, Lance, but is the cost too, because people who are inside often do not have resources to funding. And so sometimes the price of a fresh salad can be much more than a top ramen. So people might also choose that out of necessity in terms of costs, and also just like, especially cost per calorie if they're looking to just feel fed. So that's another big issue too, is in terms of people not having the resources, whether they're not getting paid very much for the jobs that they do have in the inside, or they don't have family to provide them with funds. So that's another thing. And I'll also use this opportunity just to say that there's so many things that we would love to work on and that need to be done to improve the state of farm and like food and corrections. And we as our team have only been able to do a couple of small things, and we've been starting small because, as Lance said, it is a very big ship and it takes a while to move. And there's so many people that that have to be on board and to kind of make it happen. So just to say that we know it's only our Harvest of the Month programming and our nutrition education workshop programming is only kind of a small component of what needs to be done, but hopefully this presentation can also motivate all the participants to also want to be involved in this issue and make change. And so yes, I think it was Trevor who brought that up, but agreed, it's a huge issue and something we're hoping to make change on at some point.
And Heile, did you have any more that you wanted to contribute to that? I saw your hand raised.
I do. I know we can have a whole presentation on commissary, but really, with our Harvest of the Month program, that really inspired us to look at opportunities for increasing healthier, fresh items on canteen. There are just a number of barriers to that, definitely storage being an issue, and then perishability of various items that we wanted to introduce. So something that we've been floating around is the idea of bringing garlic into the facilities and trying to sell that through canteen. And I know for some folks, it's like, what would a person do with garlic? But folks inside are very innovative with the foods that they can cook. I mean, you saw the chips and the pork rinds and ramen, but adding a little bit, of like fresher flavors through fresh garlic is definitely something. And also something that happens within CDCR is that they ask for the population's interest in what they want to see on canteen. And oftentimes they have to, substitute things out. And so if they want to eliminate the ramen packets, that has to be a majority vote, which, is unfortunately not an easy feat, because folks may or may not be used to, or they may be used to reaching for those convenience foods even pre-incarceration. And so again, there are many issues regarding canteen. As Carolyn mentioned, it's about accessibility. So, just like a lot of things are coming into play, but we are not writing it off as something that we want to address.
Great, thanks so much, Heile. And moving out to the end of the food food supply chain, we actually addressed food waste in our previous in part 1 webinar series. So I'm happy that Rajesh Jayakumar asked this question, which is, how are you handling the food wastage?
Yeah, so I mean, we're talking about the apple a day, right? Where if you're getting the apple a day, you may not want the apple a day. And so as a result, you may see thousands of apples in the trash. And so years ago, what we did to combat that is do a offer versus serve. And so the apples are put out. The individual can take the apple if they would like. And then if they don't want it, then of course they don't take it. And so that's one of the efforts. We do track our waste. And so we want to make sure that that waste is staying down. Looking at the food items that are being consumed versus the items that aren't being consumed, and working with our partners to see if we can substitute it for something that is of the same substance, being the same health benefits, as well as more preferred. And so it's a constant battle, being that we are serving 90,000 folks in our care. And so waste is definitely a top priority of ours.
Great, thank you, Lance. And this question is from Bonnie Spear. Has there been any fallout of AB 788 resulting in purchasing less fresh produce because California grown isn't continuously available and or cost effective?
Yeah, it's never continuous, right? The availability of the harvest may just be different with the time of year, with the season, with the amount of rain that we're getting. So with Harvest of the Month, it's putting us in direct communication with those farms, and they are letting us know, hey, this is available, this will be available, this isn't available. And so it does give us that ability to find out what will be available for the institutions throughout the state. And yes, as far as the items being more expensive, it's hard to figure out how we're going to deal with this budgetarily. But I'm going to say that budget management branch within CDCR has been working in tandem with my shop. And so we are able to address those costs. And so far, we've been successful.
I just want to add a little bit there also. So when thinking about like the smaller farms too, the more that we can also increase the amount of fruits and vegetables being served to the incarcerated population, essentially we can increase the volume order from the small farms too. And so like leveraging, those market channels and then pricing as well. I think also too, by improving the food that's being served, the quality of the food too, that also addresses the food waste. I know that was the previous question. And then also with AB 778, I think we're so early on in the implementation phase within CDCR. It's not really a challenge of the fallout more than it is about the buy-in at the same time. So I think we're seeing that support from the department. We've seen the support coming from the legislator and the governor. And so now it's about tying it all in from the bottom, reaching that top part as well.
Thank you so much, Heile. So we have time for probably one more question to be answered live before we move on to our next video recording from the UC Master Gardener program. But this is a really good question to kind of segue us into that topic. And this is from Delia H. Can you talk about policy ideas or implementation regarding inmates growing their own food on site? So Lance, you mentioned Insight Gardens. How widespread is their work? And are there other organizations doing this? Growing your own food is even more healing than just eating healthy food.
Yeah, I agree. And as mentioned before, we do have Insight Garden at 12 of our institutions. And when it comes to each institution, we all operate a little bit differently. And so working with that warden as a nonprofit organization such as Insight Gardening or Impact Justice, it's really that communication piece and seeing if there is a space available for that type of work. And many times the answer is going to be yes, we can figure out a way. A lot of the times also when it comes to our organizations that are bringing in this type of work, it's usually a classroom space, and classroom or space in general is very limited within our Department of Corrections. We weren't built for this rehabilitative model that we're now focusing on. And so we're making changes to figure out where is the space that we can use to offer these types of programs. But the great thing about gardening, we have tons of land. Some of these institutions are sitting on 700 acres. And so there are discussions being had right now about, hey, what is it that we need? You know, what needs to be done? There's nothing that's going to happen tomorrow or even next week, next year, but the conversations are had. Can we do it? Because yes, I think it is therapeutic work. And I think there is some, it's worth having that conversation.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Lance. And thank you as well to Heile and Carolyn and to all of you for submitting your questions. And sorry we weren't able to get to all of them in the Q&A, but our panelists will be able to answer your questions typing into the Q&A. So keep an eye out for the responses. And I'm going to pass it over to Bridget now, who's going to play our video about the UC Master Gardeners Harvesting Hope project.
Hello, and thank you for having me today. My sincere apologies that I cannot attend this presentation in person, but I'm very pleased to provide this recorded presentation for everyone today. I'm here to share stories of harvesting hope and how we do that with the UC Master Gardener program and our prison garden projects. My name is Missy Gable. I am the statewide director of the UC Master Gardener program. And before I get into some really inspiring stories of volunteer projects, I want to provide some foundational knowledge and gain some shared understanding of who the UC Master Gardener program is and what our network looks like. The UC Master Gardener program is a statewide program of UC agriculture and natural resources. Our program mission is to extend research-based knowledge and information on home horticulture, pest management, and sustainable landscaping practices to the residents of California. Through an unwavering commitment to our mission, we envision a future where all Californians can prioritize their mental, physical, community, cultural, and environmental health through gardening and an appreciation of plants. Master Gardener projects fall into 4 impact areas. We empower Californians to be more climate resilient in the face of climate change. We teach people how to grow more food. We give people knowledge and skills in sustainable landscaping practices. And finally, we inspire Californians to spend more time gardening or outdoors. We do this impactful work through our incredible community of practice that includes academics, staff, and volunteers. UC Master Gardener volunteers are members of the public who identify as being interested in our program. They go through a pretty rigorous training to become UC Master Gardener volunteers and are certified with our program. Last year, we had just over 5,800 active UC Master Gardener volunteers. These individuals represent 50 county-based programs. And each year, Master Gardener volunteers, in order to maintain their association with our program, they give back volunteer hours in support of our program's mission. Last year, Master Gardener volunteers gave back over 475,000 hours doing impactful work in those areas that I just shared with you. Through this work, they're reaching millions of Californians, and they're doing this through a variety of exciting, engaging projects. Master Gardener volunteers can also be found at over 1,000 garden locations in the state of California. So now, with some shared understanding of who the UC Master Gardener program is, I'm going to move into our presentation. So the United States has the highest per capita incarceration rate in the world. And fairly shockingly, California has a really high incarceration rate as well. In fact, in the United States, we are one of the epicenters of mass incarceration. Each year, we send about 3,500 people to prison, with 200,000 incarcerated in California at any given time. According to the Legislative Analyst's Office, the cost of incarceration in California is over $106,000 per inmate per year. Altogether, California spent over $51 billion in 2023 to support incarceration and the systems that are a part of it. These costs are increasing, largely due to inflation and rising healthcare costs. So recidivism, I'm going to define this term for you guys. Recidivism is the likelihood of an offender to reoffend. An important thing to think about and consider as we look at the cost of incarceration in California, and therefore we need to factor in the cost of recurring incarceration in California. In 2019, the 3-year recidivism rate in our state was 42%. Now, this happens for any number of reasons that professionals here in this presentation could give you. Primary re-entry challenges, though, include things like housing, medical care, employment. And a deficiency in any one of these areas can really seriously increase the rate of relapse. So what do we do to empower individuals to move from incarceration back into society and do so in a way that they feel safe and welcome and capable of spending their lives in that space with society? Rehabilitation is something that we talk about a lot when we consider incarceration in California. Rehabilitation is efforts aimed at reforming and reintegrating offenders into society. CDC is well informed in this practice and has it as one of their priorities. In fact, in 2004, CDC became CDCR when they added rehabilitation as a guiding priority. Last year, the governor's budget supported the expansion of some really impactful programs that are part of the rehabilitation of incarcerated individuals. These programs included things like substance use treatment programs, job training programs, bachelor's degree programs, and more. I want to talk about one of the restorative activities that we can be doing in prison systems in order to contribute to the rehabilitation of inmates. And that's gardening. And gardening, we do that through therapeutic horticulture. Horticulture in and of itself, I believe, is inherently therapeutic. I've listed the benefits below or on your screen there. I'm going to talk about each one. In terms of the physical benefits of gardening, when you're outdoors and you're working in a garden, you're developing or you're working on your fine motor skills, you're stretching. Gardening can also be a moderate to low impact fitness activity. When you're gardening, your heart rate goes down and your muscle tension is reduced. Mental health benefits include reduced stress and anxiety. Gardening is also known to reduce symptoms of depression. When you're gardening, your serotonin levels go up and your noradrenaline levels go down. You foster a sense of belonging and pride. And gardeners also report an increased sense of personal control or inner agency. The social benefits of gardening I want to share come from San Quentin, where they report that the garden is the only place on the prison yard where different races congregate and work in teams. The garden fosters teamwork, communication, and a supportive environment. Cognitive benefits, when we're out in the garden, we're planning, we're problem solving, we're decision making. All of these can stimulate cognitive functions. And finally, the emotional benefits. When we are nurturing plants in the garden, this provides a sense of purpose and accomplishment for many gardeners. Currently, about 15 states offer gardening training within their prisons. In California, prison gardening programs can be found in 22 prison yards and growing. Now, gardening projects are just one of the evidence-based rehabilitation programs in California. It's certainly one that I'd like to see grow and expand. Prison gardens and environmental programming contribute profoundly towards a rehabilitative experience that inspires lasting change in participants. In 2011, there was a recidivism study done by the Insight Gardening Program. This Insight Garden Program is not affiliated with the University of California, although they do very similar programming to what we're trying to do, and they do it really excellently. So they've got some great studies. Their recidivism study back in 2011 showed that participants in their garden programs who paroled between 2003 and 2009 had a less than 10% recidivism rate. This is incredible when we think about the state 3-year recidivism rate of 42%. So in general, 42% of formerly incarcerated people are re-entering the prison system after release. But for those individuals who went through gardening training with Garden Insight program, only 10% of those individuals returned. So really transformative impact. I'm going to move now into a couple of stories of UC Master Gardener program projects that are done in partnership with different facilities around the state. We're going to start in Tuolumne County at the Mother Lode Regional Juvenile Detention Facility. Oops, sorry about that. At this location, the garden began with a number of raised beds planted with vegetables, where planting and maintenance was being done by youth and supported by UC Master Gardener volunteers. The volunteers and the youth were working together to have a fruitful and plentiful garden. Produce is being harvested and moved into the kitchen system where the food was added to the menu to support a healthy, nutritious diet. You can see here participants reported mental health benefits and increased feelings of self-sufficiency after working in the garden. In 2022, the youth here came up with a great idea to expand and build a pollinator and meditation garden in an area that was just cement and grass. The youth helped write and secure a grant with support from the University of California. A young individual at this facility drew up plans for a garden, and in partnership with UC, the UC Cooperative Extension Office and UC Master Gardener Program, development on this new garden is moving forward. County Director in this area is really excited about the development, and she looks forward to seeing how the youth, the social workers, the counselors all use this space to reduce anxiety and support good mental health. Moving over to Sutter and Yuba counties at the Leo Chesney Correctional Facility, we have an impactful project here. For 6 years, UC Master Gardener volunteer taught vegetable gardening at this women's prison. The women here grew their own vegetables and took incredible pride in their accomplishments and found purpose and recreation in the garden. The fruits and vegetables that they grew were harvested and incorporated into the diet at the facility. Ultimately, it saved the county thousands of dollars while also providing a healthy and nutritious additional food to what was previously being provided to the women. The project actually inspired one inmate to pursue UC Master Gardener volunteer training after her release. Moving down into Contra Costa County, now we're at the Discovery House Residential Rehabilitation Center. This location is an alternative to prison for alcohol and drug offenders. At this location, the individuals are growing pollinator plants and ornamental plants. You see a really incredible variety of those here. Individuals working here are growing skills like responsibility, empathy, and discipline. They're developing and fostering development in communication and interpersonal skills. Research shows that poor motivation and poor social support are 2 of the top 3 contributing factors to relapse. Through the gardening project, the participants here are developing important skills, like I mentioned. Research furthermore shows that gardening activities in these settings develop community and interpersonal skills and contribute to a more robust or healthy social network that can be critical to reintegrating into society. Moving over to Santa Clara County at the Elmwood Correctional Facility, we have Master Gardener volunteers providing 8-week garden training classes. These are provided twice a year in both the spring and the fall, where inmates come and they learn from UC Master Gardener volunteers with University of California resources to learn gardening skills, learn pest identification, and how to maintain a healthy and productive garden. The training covers general gardening basics like soil, integrated pest management, plant selection, maintenance, and more. In addition to classroom education, participants learn in the garden. The garden was built with UC Master Gardener volunteers, and they use it as an outdoor classroom now. In the garden, they have raised beds where they harvest produce that is used in the kitchen. They also demonstrate composting and cover cropping. Currently, this project is hosted on the all-women side of the facility, although there are plans to expand the project in the future to include the men's program. The average inmate at Elmwood is there for 3 months while they await final sentencing, so the turnover rate is pretty high. However, the class, which again is an 8-week course, it consistently has a wait list, with 20 individuals having completed the course in 2022. Staff from Elmwood and bilingual UC Master Gardener volunteers play a pivotal role in translating the course instruction into Spanish. At the conclusion of the course, participants receive a certificate of completion that includes the number of classes they participated in. The certificate goes into their file and can be shown to a judge at a later time to help support their case for where they go and what happens with their lives moving forward. The goal of this project is to spark interest in gardening and to improve overall wellness as a result of participation. Moving over to Madera County, we have a cooperative extension office there in really close proximity to Juvenile Hall. So they've developed a wonderful partnership that has brought many fruitful collaborations. When the UC Master Gardener volunteers installed a drought-tolerant demonstration planting at the cooperative extension office, again, which is right by Juvenile Hall, they partnered with the leadership and parole officers at Juvenile Hall to allow selected youth to partner with the UC Master Gardener volunteers to clear the space, prepare it for planting, and then support the garden's installation. The youth visit the garden daily to learn and work alongside UC Master Gardener volunteers. Select youth are also transported at least monthly to meet with and work alongside UC Master Gardener volunteers in their Three Sisters demonstration garden. In addition to getting experience with plants and garden maintenance, the youth have also built patios and other hardscaping elements. The unique focus in Madera is not the plants. It's that their partnership really emphasizes the importance of education, and it serves to introduce the youth to education through the context of the garden. Youth are encouraged to see the importance of learning and develop skills, and then constantly trying to improve on their learning. They experience a welcoming community at the University of California through cooperative extension and the UC Master Gardener program. Now, these are just some of the really inspiring projects that are happening up and down the state. I truly believe that there's an opportunity for expanding this work across UC A&R, inspiring local strategies and providing opportunities for coalition building. Contributing factors to incarceration include hunger, poverty, unemployment, lower levels of education, below average wages, drugs, absentee parents, racial bias. But at UC A&R, we have a number of researchers and impactful programs and institutes that work in these different areas. The 4-H Youth Development has a focus on Black and Latino males and bringing them into STEM fields. They also work in urban communities. The Master Food Preserver, Expanded Food Nutrition Education Program, CalFresh, and Nutrition, Family, and Consumer Sciences, all of those programs work in nutrition education and food access. The Master Gardener program, which you now know a little bit about, works in gardening knowledge and how we can use that for therapy and workforce development. We have a fire network that includes inmate firefighter programs and both youth and inmate fire camp programs in prescribed burn work. We also have incredible projects like Money Talks and Money Talks for Teens to empower people with knowledge and information about how they can budget so that they can provide for themselves and their family in terms of their needs and providing a nutritious diet. These are just a small number of the incredible statewide projects and institutes, but also the personnel who represent UC Ag and Natural Resources, and I believe truly represent what we could do in the future with meaningful partnership with the University of California Ag and Natural Resources and our centers for incarceration and other types of facilities where we're working to support individuals to reintegrate into society. If you're interested in learning more about the UC Master Gardener program, I would encourage you to visit our website. You can check out our impact report there, where you can hear stories about what's happening around the state of California. You can see what events or activities might be coming up in your local area, or you can even sign up to become a UC Master Gardener volunteer in the future. And then here, if you want to take a minute to scan this QR code, this will take you to a wonderful California agriculture article about some of the impactful projects that I've mentioned today, as well as a couple of that I just couldn't get to due to time. This is an article about prison gardening projects with the University of California. I would encourage you to check it out for more information. Thank you all so much for your time today. It's a real pleasure to join you again. I'm sorry I could not be there in person. Please don't hesitate again to visit our website. Feel free to look me up if you have any specific questions or you'd like additional details about any of these impactful projects. We are more than happy to share. Thank you so much.
So I know Missy's not here, but a big thank you to Missy for that incredible video. Really inspiring to see what the Master Gardeners are doing across the state, and also some really incredible and inspiring stories that might inspire other locations across the nation to implement such programs. So thank you again to all of our speakers. Thank you, Carolyn, Lance, Heile. Thank you to Bridget with our team who's helped with managing the webinar. Thank you, Bridget. And thank you to all of you for attending. We really appreciated the discussion and the dialogue with your questions. And I wanted to remind everyone that the webinar recording will be available on the event webpage in about 1 week, and we'll also be posting the resources that we shared in the chat from our first set of speakers. So thanks again, everybody, and have a beautiful day.